Okay, so I want you to picture a scene with me for a second.
I'm with you.
We're deep in the heart of Silicon Valley. This is the epicenter of the future, right?
So the place where the algorithms that run our lives are born.
Exactly, and we're zooming in on this top engineer, someone who builds the very code that dictates what you see on your feed. But here's the thing.
Okay.
She isn't staring at a wall of monitors. She's not frantically coding. She's sitting at this big, heavy wooden table, and her hands are just covered in oil paint.
Wow. It's a striking image. No screens, no data streams, no Wi-Fi.
Nothing. Just brushes, silence, and, the smell of turpentine.
So she calls this her analog hour.
She does. And honestly, when I first read this in the prep material, I kind of rolled my eyes a little.
Oh, for sure. You think, okay, here we go.
Right. Wealthy tech executive has a quirky, expensive hobby. But digging into these sources, turns out this isn't just about painting. It's part of a massive, quiet revolution.
One that's happening with CEOs, neuroscientists, even elite athletes.
They're all turning to things like chess and pottery and even just handwriting.
And the question we have to ask is, why? I mean, why would people who are obsessed with efficiency and speed resort to tools that are, well, they're archaic?
Exactly. That is the mystery we're unpacking today. Because the answer isn't just, nostalgia.
Yeah.
It's actually a little unsettling. The research suggests our brains are physically breaking under the demand to be always on.
I mean, this whole deep dive, it's not just about hobbies. It's about what one researcher calls neurological nutrition.
I love that term.
Me too. And looking at this stack of studies we have from Stanford Neuroscience Labs, behavioral reports from Google, the central thesis is pretty clear.
What's that?
The solution to digital burnout isn't a better calendar app or some new productivity hack.
It's biology.
It's biology. It's about reclaiming the actual machinery of the mind.
So let's jump right into the deep end then, this invisible crisis. We all feel it, right? That little buzz in the back of your head. But how bad is it, really?
It's pervasive, and what's interesting is that we often treat it like a moral failing, like we just lacked discipline.
Oh, totally. I just need to try harder.
Exactly. But the data paints a picture of a human mind that is essentially under siege. Let's look at the status quo. There's a study here on digital toggling.
Hoggling.
Yeah. It found that the average knowledge worker switches between apps or tabs nearly 1,000 times a day.
1,000. That sounds impossible.
It sounds high until you actually track it. Check email, Slack pops up, switch to Slack, notification on LinkedIn, switch again, back to the spreadsheet.
Then you check the weather just because you're bored for a second.
It's all micro-switching.
It's like revving a car engine in neutral over and over and over again.
That's a perfect analogy, analogy. And the neurobiology of this is where it gets really scary. We aren't just shifting attention, we are chemically spiking our brains.
With every notification.
Every time you see a red notification badge, your brain releases a hit of dopamine.
The feel-good chemical.
Well, actually, that's a common misconception. Dopamine isn't just about pleasure. It's more about anticipation.
Oh, right.
It's the seeking chemical. It's the exact same neurochemical mechanism that's involved in slot machines. It's called a variable reward schedule.
Meaning you don't know if you're going to get a reward or not.
Exactly. You check your phone, and maybe there's an exciting text, or maybe there's nothing. That uncertainty is what makes it so addictive.
So we are essentially carrying slot machines in our pockets, pulling the lever
Every 3 minutes, yes. And over time, this completely rewires your baseline for attention. It creates what the researchers call low-grade anxiety.
That constant itch.
That itch to check your device. Even when you know nothing important has happened in the last 30 seconds, your brain is panicked, it might miss a reward.
I definitely feel that. It's like a phantom limb, but for information. But here's the part from the reading that really challenged me.
What's that?
We seem to have a completely broken definition of rest.
This is a crucial point. We tend to think of the brain like a muscle in the gym. We think productivity means lifting heavy all day, every day.
Right, I'm swamped is basically a status symbol now.
Well,
If you aren't burned out, are you even trying?
exactly. But we misunderstand how muscles and brains actually work. A muscle doesn't strengthen while you are lifting the weight.
It strengthens when you rest afterwards.
Precisely. The tearing happens in the gym. The building happens on the couch. The brain is the same. The problem is we don't actually give it real rest.
Okay, let's clarify that, because I think most people, myself included, would assume that lying on the couch and scrolling through Netflix or Instagram is rest.
You're physically inactive, sure.
You're chilling. Why doesn't that count?
Because, neurologically, you're running a marathon. The sources describe this concept of incomplete loops.
Incomplete loops.
When you're scrolling, your brain is processing thousands of micro-decisions. Do I like this photo? What does that text mean? Look at that bright color. It never, ever releases the cognitive load.
So the engine is still running hot, even if the car is parked.
Precisely. Because of that constant input, the brain never enters the state it needs for actual rejuvenation. It's juggling all these open tabs, figuratively and literally. It can't do its housekeeping.
That explains so much. It explains why you can spend 3 hours relaxing on your phone and somehow feel more exhausted afterwards.
It's junk food for the brain. It feels like you're eating, but you're starving.
I want to ground this in a real story because the science is compelling, but the human cost is what makes this so urgent. Our sources introduce us to a guy named Ethan.
Ah, yes, Ethan, the narrative anchor for this whole deep dive.
So Ethan, he's a 29-year-old graphic designer in London. And looking at his profile, he sounds like, well, pretty much everyone I know.
Talented, ambitious, works in a creative field, but he fell into the trap.
The multitasking trap.
Yeah.
Right. His process became pure stimulation. He describes his workspace.
Oh, I remember this part.
Pinterest open on one monitor for inspiration, 10 different design tabs on another, Slack pinging constantly, Spotify blasting techno.
He called it getting in the zone.
But his brain called it war.
Mm-hmm.
He did this for 2 years. And then he hit a wall. And we aren't talking about, I need a nap, tired. He hit what psychologists call attentional fatigue.
This is a serious condition. Ethan describes it so vividly, he couldn't focus for more than 5 minutes at a time.
And his ideas, which were his whole livelihood, they just stopped coming. He'd stare at a blank canvas and feel nothing.
His motivation just completely collapsed.
And the scary part is, he went to the doctor, they ran all the biological tests, blood work, thyroid, everything. And physically,
He was fine.
totally fine. But neurologically, he was in chronic overload. His brain looked like a switchboard that had just short-circuited.
The neurons were firing, but the connections weren't holding.
So here's Ethan, basically watching his career implode because he can't think. And the turning point, the pivot, it was completely accidental.
It wasn't a prescription or a therapy session.
No, it was a Saturday morning. He was just cleaning his apartment.
And he finds this old wooden chess set.
Tucked away, pieces all worn down. He remembers playing as a kid. So on a whim, he sets it up.
And this is the key moment. He engages with it. No screens, no phone.
There's the tactile feel of the wood and the silence of the room. He played against himself for about an hour.
And he said it was like magic.
Within weeks of doing this regularly, he felt sharper, clearer. He described it as getting his brain back.
And that's where we have to stop and ask, why? Why does moving some wooden pieces on a board fix a brain that's been broken by digital overload?
It sounds almost too simple, doesn't it?
It does. It sounds like one of those just go outside platitudes. But this brings us to the science of the analog reset.
Because this isn't magic, it's neuroscience. We have data from Stanford and Harvard MRI studies in our notes here. What is actually happening inside the skull when we do something tactile?
It's fascinating. There are 3 main things happening. First, when you engage in these hands-on tasks, you're activating the somatosensory cortex.
The part of the brain for touch and movement.
Exactly. And this area is massive. When you use your hands for something complex, you are lighting up a huge part of your brain that usually just sits dormant while you scroll.
Okay, so you're waking up the sleeping giants in the brain.
Exactly. Second, the prefrontal cortex, the CEO of the brain, responsible for focus. It starts to synchronize with those emotional and motor regions. It creates a rhythm.
And this synchronization does what?
It drastically lowers cortisol, the stress hormone,
So the anxiety just drops.
immediately. But third, and this is the most important part for Ethan, this state enhances neuroplasticity.
Which is the brain's ability to rewire itself, to form new connections.
Precisely. So by doing something slow and physical, he was literally repairing the neural pathways that the digital scrolling had torn apart.
The source material references Cal Newport, the author of Deep Work. He has this brilliant quote.
Oh, I know the one you mean.
Focus is a muscle trained by depth and broken by distraction.
Broken by distraction. That just hits hard.
It does. Analog hobbies train that depth, but without the pressure of work. When you're painting or playing chess, you aren't chasing productivity.
You're just tuning your attention to one single fluid stream. Time seems to dilate, the noise fades.
So that state, that's not just zoning out, is it? Because earlier we said zoning out on Netflix is bad. So how is this different?
Great question. Scientists call this active rest, or task-negative rejuvenation. When you're doing something repetitive and tactile, like knitting or sanding wood, it allows the brain to enter something called the default mode network.
The default mode network, or DMN. We hear that term a lot in flow state research, but what is it effectively?
Think of the DMN as the brain's night shift janitorial staff.
I like that.
It's the network that turns on when you aren't focusing on a specific problem. It connects disparate ideas, it consolidates memories, processes emotions. It is the absolute holy grail of creativity.
And here's the catch. You can't enter the default mode network if you're looking at a screen.
Correct. If you're consuming content, your executive attention network is active. You're processing input. The janitors can't come in and clean if the office is full of people.
You need the silence of analog tasks to let the DMN do its job.
That is such a clear image. So Ethan playing chess wasn't wasting time. He was clearing out the office so the janitors could get to work.
Exactly. He was feeding his brain the neurological nutrition it was starving for.
This leads us to what the sources call the paradox of productivity.
Right, because logically, if I'm a manager or some ambitious entrepreneur, I'm thinking, if I spend an hour playing chess, that's an hour I'm not working, I'm losing time.
That is the intuition. We are obsessed with input. But the data says the opposite. We have findings here from Google's own well-being division.
Google, the kings of data, what did they find?
They found that employees who took analog breaks, simple things like walking without their phones or sketching on paper, they solved creative problems 40% faster when they got back to their desks.
40% faster. That is massive.
It's a huge efficiency gain. It turns out slowing down doesn't waste time, it refuels it. It's about the quality of your thinking, not the quantity of hours you put in.
It's like pulling back the arrow to shoot it forward.
That's a perfect analogy. The sources call this dual training. It's a concept from elite athletes. You have to train the body, yes, but you also have to train the mind's rhythm.
And we have some heavy hitters on this list. Michael Phelps, for example. You'd think his training was just swimming laps until he passed out.
You'd think, but Phelps famously said his greatest gains didn't come from more laps. They came from how he rested, visualization, silence, disconnecting.
He treated recovery with the same intensity as his workout.
Exactly. And chess grandmasters. This one fascinates me. Between tournament matches, you'll often see them taking these long walks.
But crucially, without technology.
Oh, without technology. They need to defragment their thoughts. If they looked at a screen, they'd disrupt the consolidation of the strategies they just played. They need that analog gap.
Even the tech giants themselves do this. We've got Jack Dorsey meditating, Bill Gates writing notes longhand, Jeff Bezos strictly blocking out wandering time.
It is ironic, isn't it? The people who built the tools that distract us are the most protective of their own analog time.
They know their competitive edge is in their ability to think deeply.
And you can't think deeply if you're always just reacting.
Which brings us back to Ethan. He adopted this philosophy, right? It wasn't just a one-off chess game.
No, he made it a ritual. He instituted what he called analog mornings, 1 hour every single day, 0 screens.
So what would he do?
He would journal, sketch, or play that chess game before he ever even opened his laptop.
And the result?
A huge surge in creativity. His client satisfaction scores went up. But more importantly, he said he got his mojo back. He enjoyed his work again because his brain wasn't constantly hyperventilating.
It really highlights that this isn't just about wellness or self-care. It's about performance.
Yeah.
Now, I want to move to the climax of this deep dive. Because while Ethan's story has a happy ending, the broader picture from these reports is, honestly, it's alarming.
It is. The sources mention the pandemic as a massive accelerant to this crisis.
Our screen time didn't just go up, it exploded. And our collective attention spans just crashed.
We stripped away all the analog buffers, the commute, the coffee shop chat, and replaced them with Zoom and doom scrolling.
There is this stat from a Microsoft study that's been floating around. It's controversial, but the trend line is undeniable.
I think I know what you're talking about.
It suggests the human attention span has dropped to about 8 seconds.
8 seconds.
The study notes that this is less than the attention span of a goldfish. And I know scientists debate the numbers, but the feeling is real.
The specific number matters less than the trajectory. We're losing the ability to hold a single thought. We're losing cognitive persistence.
There's a quote here from Dr. Sheehan Harding, formerly of Imperial College. She puts it so bluntly. We're training our brains for reaction, not reflection.
Reaction, not reflection. That is the crisis in a nutshell. We're becoming stimulus response machines.
See notification, click. See email, reply. See headline, get angry.
We are losing the gap between the stimulus and the response where thinking actually happens.
And this is where the stakes get really high. It's not just about whether you can finish a report at work, it's about who we are.
Yes, it's about depth, patience,
Yeah.
intuition, nuance. These are the qualities that make us human. AI can react faster. Algorithms can process data faster.
If we lose the capacity for deep reflection, we lose the very thing that makes us distinct.
There's a moment in the source text where Ethan actually cries. He realizes his burnout wasn't just weakness.
He says it was biology fighting back.
That's a powerful realization. His body was rejecting the digital diet. It was screaming for something real. It's like his brain had scurvy.
And he's not alone. The sources describe this as a movement, a survival instinct kicking in across society.
We're seeing university students swapping iPads for physical notebooks. We're seeing therapists prescribing watercolors and gardening instead of just medication.
It's a quiet rebellion. People are realizing they have to fight for their own minds. That convenience has come at a massive cognitive cost.
So what does this mean for us, for the listener right now who might be listening to this while checking their emails?
If we look at the big takeaway here, it seems pretty clear.
The takeaway is that the benefits of analog life are tangible and measurable. Writing by hand increases memory retention by 30% compared to typing.
Painting reawakens the sensory cortex. Walking without a phone boosts divergent thinking.
But it's about more than just data points, though.
It is, it's about presence.
Yes. Digital life, by definition, takes you elsewhere. You are in the cloud, in the feed, in the inbox. You are never here.
Analog activity rewires the brain for the here and now.
It forces you to be where your hands are. You can't play chess while thinking about an email, or you'll lose. You can't throw a pot on a wheel while checking Instagram.
Or you'll ruin the clay.
Exactly. And that is the insight I want everyone to sit with. A brilliant mind isn't the one that runs the fastest. It's the mind that knows when to pause.
Because in that pause, the magic happens.
Thoughts untangle. Ideas connect. You start hearing your own voice again instead of the noise of the world.
I love that. In a world obsessed with acceleration, the smartest thing you can do is just slow down.
The future might belong not to the fastest mind, but to the most present one.
So, here is our challenge to you, the listener. Tonight, when you get that itch to open an app or check your email just one more time, don't.
Resist the urge. It'll be uncomfortable at first.
Grab a guitar, dust off a chessboard, pick up a pen and write on actual paper. Let your hands think for you for a while.
Give your brain the rest it actually needs.
And see what happens when the noise stops. Thanks for diving in with us.
It's been a pleasure.
We'll catch you in the next deep dive.